All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to all of you that are joining us here from literally all over the country and many people from around the world. My name is Chris Fair. I'm the president and founder of Resonance. I'm excited to be talking today about the report that we've released yesterday of our 2024 America's Best Cities rankings. We have some interesting new insights to share with you today from the research conducted for this report. Before we dive in, just a bit of housekeeping that Tom Gersumchuk, our VP Communications, is behind the scenes. If you have any logistics, you can reach him through the chat. And also want to encourage you to submit questions in the Q&A, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. Should be about 40 minutes. There's a lot of data and a lot of insights to go through and share. We'll try and keep it fast-paced and get to those questions and discussion at the end. And of course, you can see all of the attendees and chat with each other as well, and share where you're coming from, joining us from, and what city or place you're in. Please put that into the chat so we can let everybody know for context where you're all coming from. So with that, let's dive in and get started. Briefly, just in terms of background, I wanted to share a couple of slides for those of you that aren't familiar with Resonance. Resonance is a consultancy that focuses on transformative strategies, brands, and campaigns to attract talent, visitors, and investments to destinations, cities, and communities. So everything that we're doing at Resonance is really trying to understand what is it that attracts people to places, and what are the messages and positioning and strategies in order to help improve the performance of places. That means our work really falls into three areas, whether that's place strategy, creating economic development strategies for places like Arlington in Virginia, to tourism plans for cities like Los Angeles getting ready for the Olympic Games, to destination stewardship plans for entire regions and countries. At the same time, a big part of our focus is on place branding for cities, communities, countries from many different places, ranging from Christchurch in New Zealand to Brussels in Belgium, to Baltimore here in the US. And then we're also focused on place marketing in terms of how do we take the strategy, how do we take the positioning and attract visitors, communicate with visitors, residents, companies, in order to realize the outcomes we're seeking in the strategies that we create. Our work today is really a wide diverse of countries such as Canada, or down to cities, San Diego, Houston, Los Angeles, Brussels, to smaller communities and towns across the US and around the world. And the common question in all of our work, whether it's been doing economic development strategy, tourism planning, place branding, is that we are asking ourselves, how do we measure the performance of place? What is it? How do we quantify what makes one place better, so to speak, than another? And that really depends on your point of view and your perspective. Are we thinking about this as a place to live? Are we thinking about it as a place to visit? Or are we thinking about it as a place to do business? So what makes one place or city better than another really depends on which lens are you looking at it from. And what we realized, and the whole approach to creating the best cities rankings and methodology, has been to create a holistic model that looks at cities, places through all three of these lenses, that we're not just looking at it from a livability perspective, or we're not just looking at it from an economic perspective, or we're just not just looking at it from a visitor attraction perspective, but integrating these three perspectives together in order to measure livability, lovability, and prosperity. And I'll get into discussion a little bit more detail about what goes into each of those areas and the metrics that we've selected and use for the rankings. Ultimately, what we're looking for to define livability, lovability, and prosperity are factors that have the highest correlation with attracting prime age population. Those are people aged 25 to 44 years old, really the workforce that drives urban economies. Or we're looking for factors that have high correlation with visitor expenditure, in terms of not only attracting the number of visitors, but the yield and the expenditure that they create, the economic impact. And then we're also looking for factors that have the highest correlation with the formation of new businesses, small businesses, startups in urban economies. What we've looked at and realized is that a lot of these factors overlap. And this is an analysis, and I've shared this in the past, of many, many different factors, over 1,000 factors analyzed back in 2019. And we could see that some of these factors overlap in terms of what is driving talent attraction, visitor expenditure, and business formation. You can see culture at the heart of this as a factor that overlapped in all three of these different areas. Of course, you could see things where talent was looking for job opportunities. They were going to cities that had Fortune 500 companies that were creating those job opportunities. They were also interested in museums, and professional sports teams were factors that we saw had high correlations with talent attraction. Of course, no surprise, visitor attraction, you see factors like the number of very good or excellent hotels, the size of the convention center, and then you had factors driving business like venture capital, immigration, the ranking of the university, the number of people working in professional services, health and tech employment, the safety of the city. So these things overlapped, and what we wanted to do was kind of revisit that, because of course our world changed in 2020, with the onset of the pandemic. And we looked at and wanted to reevaluate and see what have been some of the impacts of this change that we've undergone. And really, I would characterize this as a structural change. And this doesn't happen often. Oftentimes there's disruptions and things regress back to the mean. But we are seeing, particularly in the United States, what appear to be some significant long-term changes that are affecting location decisions, both for talent and for site selection, and frankly, for visitation as well. So some of these, just a few things that won't be news to anyone here, is that, we see office occupancy here in the US is less than 20%, on Mondays and Fridays. I'm here in our office in New York, and of course, there are far fewer people in the office on Mondays and almost no one in the office on Fridays today. So this is changing. Obviously, we've seen demand for office space has declined, and there's significant disruption in commercial real estate markets. At the same time, we're seeing, and this is not a trend as a result of the pandemic, but it has been a long-term trend, which is consumers in the US spending more and more of their disposable income on travel and leisure. It was about 8% in 2010. It had risen to 9% in 2020, and this is forecast to grow to 10% in 2030. So consumers in the US are not only spending, travel and tourism and leisure is growing, but they're prioritizing that and spending more and more of the share of wallet is being captured for travel and leisure. And of course, if people are going into the office less, they're working from home more. So we see demand and prices for residential housing really be at all-time highs, while demand for office space is at record lows. And at the same time, from an economic development perspective, we have massive investment in reindustrialization. There's more than $16 billion a month being spent on construction of manufacturing facilities in the United States. And this is all being driven by the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, with more than $1.4 trillion of government investment available out there. So this is driving massive investment in new chips facilities in Texas, in Syracuse, New York, in Arizona. And of course, there are major investments throughout the supply chain as companies are now reshoring or nearshoring, more of their services from the supply chain that they need to drive their businesses. So this is in effect driving a lot of development and job creation into so-called second-tier cities, suburban, exurban locations, because of course these large manufacturing facilities are not being, for the most part, developed or built in our city centers. So this asks us what's driving people to places now and really affecting those location decisions. And this surprised us as we updated this correlation analysis, looking at many of the different factors. The factors themselves haven't changed in terms of the ones that have the highest correlation with visitor expenditure, prime age population growth, and business formation. What's happened is that they've converged together. And though we saw back in 2019 with some of these factors overlapping, have now almost become synonymous with one another. That the factors that are important, where you see prime age population moving to in the country are also the places that visitors want to go to. And it's also the places where the greatest number of businesses are being formed. And you can see through that list there, job opportunities, housing affordability, airport connectivity, museums, culture, the number of patents being created and issued from one city to the next, the amount of immigration, et cetera. Of course, there are a couple factors out here on the fringe. So we've also found that things like broadband internet access has now appeared to have a correlation with where prime age population is moving. So the better the internet access, the more people 25 to 44 years old. And that makes sense if you think about the rise of remote work. If I am going to be working remotely, you need good broadband internet access. So that's a new factor that's emerged. And of course, there are still factors like venture capital, which have a very specific relationship and correlation with business formation. And there are still other factors like hotels that have a relationship to visitor expenditure and attraction. And if I had to sort of what my thesis is in terms of why we've seen this convergence of factors is really that now in a time when in the US, when people can live or visit anywhere, they want to live or visit somewhere. So this idea of not, necessarily, moving out to live in the wilderness, technically you could do that. But the reality is you want to live in a vibrant, thriving place and community, whether that's as a place to live and work, whether you're working in an office or working remotely, or you're part of the labor workforce. You want things to see and do to spend that leisure time on. And the same is true if you're choosing a place to visit. People want to visit the places that have the most activities, culture, sports events, et cetera. And that happens to also then be the places where the greatest number of new businesses are being created across the country. To validate that hypothesis this year, our team at Resonance has partnered with Ipsos, and we conducted a survey of the general population across the US, specifically to ask them, well, what are the cities that you would most like to live in someday? Where are the cities you want to visit? And what cities do you think have the greatest job opportunities? And this is, I'll share some of the results here, just high level of what the top 10 were. And it might surprise you to see that when we asked what are the cities, small towns included, that you would most like to live in someday, New York, Miami, Los Angeles are at the top of the list. Of course, then you see some other places like Las Vegas, San Diego, and even San Francisco, which has been much aligned in media, still appears in the top 10 in terms of places Americans would most like to live someday. And then you see Houston in Texas, and interesting Denver, as a place that offers probably a good balance of many of the different things that people are looking for today. The next question we asked was, well, which cities would you be most interested in visiting in the next 12 to 24 months? And again, you actually get a similar list of cities. New York, now you see places like Las Vegas, Miami move up the list. And then you see places like Orlando that appear on this list that are not necessarily as high in terms of people's consideration as a place to live, but one of the most, Los Angeles and Orlando and New York being the most visited cities in the United States. Not surprising that we would see them, on this list of top 10. And of course, other popular places like San Diego and Boston are on the list of places people would most like to visit one day. The next question gets a little bit slightly different results when we ask them, where do you believe the best job opportunities are today? And again, you see the largest cities, not surprisingly, at the top of the list, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. But then you see cities like Dallas and Atlanta that weren't in the top 10 as a place to live or as a place to visit. But the perception is that they offer strong employment opportunities. And then you see other cities like, Austin appearing on the list as well. So again, to the point that I made earlier, what makes one city better than another depends on the lens through which you ask that question. Are you thinking about it as a place to live? Are you thinking about it as a place to visit? Or are you thinking about it as a place for job opportunity? And this kind of just lines those up, and you can kind of see some of those variations amongst the top 10. But what's interesting, and one of the takeaways is what we're looking at here for the purposes of our presentation today are just those top 10 cities. But what we found is that actually we had more than 70 different towns and cities across the US were identified as desirable places to live, visit, or work. So while I'm just showing you the top 10, one of the takeaways here is that there is quite a diverse range of cities and towns across the country that people feel are desirable places to live, visit, or start a business. And that's where this year, for the first time in our 2024 America's Best Cities report that we released yesterday, we have included that perception data into the rankings. So taking that data about living, lovability, and prosperity and incorporating that into the rankings. So we're not only now looking at those key factors that are driving performance, but also looking at what people's perception are and balancing that in the rankings. And you can download the report for free at bestcities.us, or you can go to worldsbestcities.com where all of the reports are available. But bestcities.us will take you directly to the page to be able to download that report if you like. So I'm going to walk through just, what goes into that methodology of the rankings, and we'll go through the specific factors. So that first section was really about livability. And this is where we're evaluating the quality of the natural built environment within a city, but also looking at socioeconomic factors such as the affordability of monthly rents in terms of the cost of living. These factors are not only important to retaining talent, but also attracting it. And I think a lot of the migration that we have seen in terms of people's outflow from some of the major large cities has been a flight to affordability and livability. A lot of that is now driving up prices in these other cities, and we'll see that livability or that affordability advantage is probably won't be sustained in many of these places. But that's something that we'll be monitoring over time. So these are the factors that we're looking at in our livability scores. And one of the other interesting aspects in the US in particular, relative to other parts of the world, has been the rise in the correlation between the walkability and bikeability of cities and the size of the prime age population. So what this is telling us now versus in 2019 is that people are making location decisions about where to live based on how bikeable or walkable they are. These factors that are particularly important to younger generations. Also, then we're looking at measuring the number of sites and landmarks. So this could include neighborhoods, interesting places to visit within a city. Parks and outdoor experiences are an important factor. And then those socioeconomic factors I mentioned, like the cost of living. What's the average rent for an apartment? And then adding in this year's ranking, internet access, which was a factor we hadn't looked at in the past in terms of what is the average broadband internet speed in that metropolitan area. And then the last piece in this score is the perception ranking of where did the city rank in the Ipsos survey when we asked what cities would you be most interested in in living someday. So these are the results. When you blend all of those data points together, you get this ranking: New York at the top, Chicago. So, Miami is a city that, has really moved up the list. And then followed by San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles, Las Vegas appears in this top 10, San Diego, Washington, D.C., and Denver. So that's when we think about it and look at it as a city for a place to live. The next section really is around what we call lovability. And when you think about visitation, and I ask you or question about, what city do you want most interested in visiting? People will often use and answer and reply, well, I love New York, or I love Los Angeles, or I love Miami. And love and that connection to place is really born not out of the hardware that place offers, but what we like to call the software, the experiential quality of the place in terms of the culture, sports, dining, nightlife. And this is something that we've looked at and has really been part of the rankings since we started this exercise in the Best Cities reports 9 years ago, has been incorporating a lot of this experiential data, because we see that it not only has high correlations with attracting visitors and visitor expenditure, but business formation and talent attraction as well. So you end up with a really interesting mix here of things like the number of professional sports teams, the number of nightlife experiences, the number of restaurants and culinary experiences, the number of shopping experiences, cultural experiences in terms of concerts, shows, events, the number of attractions, And then also some key factors that we mine from online channels like Facebook, TripAdvisor, Instagram, the Google Trends score. So we can really look at and see how people are interacting with that particular place based on the volume of check-ins and Instagram mentions and Google searches and reviews and TripAdvisor as a metric for the attachment and the vibrancy of that place. And then here we're also now incorporating the results of that perception data from Ipsos as well in terms of the cities that people most want to visit in the next 12 to 24 months. So here you get a slightly different list, and not surprising, now you see those more tourism-oriented destinations like Las Vegas, like Miami, Orlando, moving up the list, but you still have New York at the top of the list, Los Angeles, Chicago, not far behind. So the last section we'll look at in terms of the rankings and the data that we've collected is around the prosperity. And prosperity isn't just around the key economic indicators, but really looking at human capital in terms of educational attainment, the percentage of people participating in the labor force. We've record low unemployment in many cities across the US. So this is becoming an important decision. Where is the workforce available in terms of site selection for these manufacturing facilities and core companies that we're looking at. And we're also looking at how innovative the city is in terms of the number of patents that have been created and the number of jobs and companies in professional, scientific, and technical services. And then there are things like business infrastructure, airport connectivity, the ranking of and the quality of a university, et cetera, that are helping to create that workforce. So here, we again have an interesting mix of different factors. Some of the things that we've included here are also the number of foreign-born residents. We're seeing a high correlation between the diversity of an urban area and business formation. So this is not only just about the businesses that are there, but diversity and immigration being a key driver. Airport connectivity, as I mentioned, is something that has high correlations with, obviously, with visitor expenditure, but also business formation. And interestingly, talent attraction in terms of prime age population is moving to places that are well connected to other places. So on this, you get a slightly different list. And as we saw in some of the perception survey research, that a city like Dallas now propels itself into the top 5 as it relates to not only perception in terms of job opportunity, but its performance for a lot of those key prosperity indicators. We also see Atlanta here, and then city like San Jose, as you think about Silicon Valley and the prosperity that's created there, it powers itself up into the top 10 as well. So when we take those rankings, all of the data that we've collected, we looked at more than 125 cities with populations of 500 or 1,000 or more across the US. And the overall score is the average between the livability, lovability, and prosperity scores. And these are the results. So you look at New York, Chicago, Los Angeles as the top 3. City like Miami that's really powering itself up the rankings because of a lot of the desirability around perception. Then you have Las Vegas, also popular destination to visit, but also growing in terms of adding sports teams, companies, economic opportunity. So Las Vegas is now becoming much more than just a tourism destination. It's becoming a powerful urban economy as well. San Francisco, Boston, Washington, Seattle, and Houston. Then it gets even more interesting as you get outside the top 10 and you look down this list and starting to see the San Diego is just outside of the top 10, followed by Orlando and Atlanta, places like Denver that offering great economic opportunity, quality of life, is actually fast ahead in our rankings over Austin. Then you have Dallas, Philadelphia, and Minneapolis, New Orleans, Portland. And I think it's interesting as you get into looking at some of these other cities that are really moving up the list that we don't necessarily see a lot about in the media yet, but places like Salt Lake City. Of course, we have, NHL franchise leaving Phoenix, moving to Salt Lake. There's a lot going on there in terms of prosperity, company formation. Expect that we'll see more about Salt Lake in the near future. And then we do hear a lot about Phoenix and Nashville, but then, of course, Tampa. Actually, as you look around Tampa, that has been one of the areas what the counties surrounding Tampa, where we've seen the greatest net population gains over the last few years. So it's something that we'll be keeping an eye on and looking at here in the future. So of course, these are just the top 30 cities. You can download the report at worldsbestcities.com or go to bestcities.us and see the full list of the 100 cities. So we're not going to go through all of that today. Really wanted to say, well, what are some of the takeaways? What are we learning from this exercise that we're applying in our work, whether that's as a brand strategy, whether it's for an economic development strategy, or thinking about tourism and destination development. And as I said, there's that convergence of factors, and they're not all related to one another in terms of livability, lovability, prosperity, but they have become quite intertwined. So even when we think about innovation and the innovation economy, whether that's patents, whether it's the research within the university, the number of businesses and professional, scientific, technical services, those have obvious and clear relationships to the prosperity and the growth of the economy. But interestingly, they also having a strong relationship with visitor expenditure. So now seeing that the more innovative the city is and the more it's prospering, its innovation economy is growing, the more its visitor economy is growing as well. So that's one takeaway. I think second one is around connectivity. As I mentioned, we've always seen there's been an overlap between talent attraction and visitor arrivals and expenditure based on the number of connections, direct connections the airport serves. But that now is also showing strong correlations with business formation as well. So the airport and the connectivity of that has an important relationship across all three sectors and is a key piece of infrastructure that is more important than ever. The third key takeaway here, and no surprise that the affordability and availability of housing is a challenge for cities across the country. This was something, if we think back to 2018, 2019, we were talking about that here in New York or in other large cities. Now this is a challenge for cities of all sizes across the country. So the popularity of places like Austin or Raleigh or Tampa or some of these what were so-called second-tier cities, are now having the same challenges with affordability and availability of housing. And this has also happened and spread through the region as we think about prices rising in suburban locations. If people are not having to work in the office 5 days a week, the demand and the pricing of housing in suburban areas and outlying areas connected to the cities is actually accelerating, growing even more than in the city centers. Fourth, and this was not new, is the importance of culture. And when we think about culture in the urban environment, it's not just cultural institutions in terms of performing arts centers, museums, etc., which are critically important and drivers, especially now in city centers. If there's less of a reason to go into the city for work, then making the city a destination for culture and social activities and experiences even more important. But also informal urban culture, and which is why we think about placemaking being so important, of how are we dispersing visitation and getting people to experience different neighborhoods and having local shops and experiences and not just congregating in the same highly concentrated areas of the urban environment. The fifth kind of takeaway here is that even with remote work, that corporate headquarters still matter. We're still seeing correlations with the location of prime age population and the number of Fortune 500 companies located within those urban regions or areas. It'll be interesting to monitor this over time to see if that relationship weakens, if we continue to have large percentage of the population working remotely or only coming into the office 1 to 3 days a week. But right now, still seeing that as a key driver for prosperity of the urban region and economy. As I mentioned earlier, diversity, when we're looking at the relationship with the number of foreign-born residents and ensuring that we have policies and programming where foreigners are welcome. And this is, in fact, critically important for a lot of the largest cities in the United States. One of the phenomena we have seen when we look at the US Census data is that there has been domestic outflow, and some of these cities have actually lost population, like New York. But it is being replaced by international immigrants. Even a city like Miami actually has had a net loss. More domestic residents have moved out of Miami than have moved in the last 4 years, but they've been offset by record levels of international immigration. So a lot of our largest cities, our gateway cities, are becoming more international, and that's an opportunity because as I said earlier, we see that relationship between foreign-born residents and the number of businesses being formed. Immigration is a powerful driver of the startup economy. And it also has a strong relationship with visitor expenditure because, of course, you are attracting more VFR in terms of visiting friends and relatives, travel to these cities that have larger immigrant populations. Sports teams, I mean, this has always been contentious of what kind of public funding should go into supporting the construction and development of sports stadium. I think even now, our friend Richard Florida, the author of The Creative Class, has said and kind of confessed that he was actually wrong in all his campaigning against spending public money on infrastructure, stadiums, et cetera. I'm now seeing that these are critical drivers that, as I said earlier, if we have fewer people coming into our city centers for work, what are the other things that are going to drive visitation? And sports events, stadiums are a potential key replacement or driver for the attraction of people into our city centers. Of course, if they're located off in a suburban location that everybody drives to, the effect of that is not as powerful, but people are choosing to locate to cities that have large numbers of more professional sports teams. Sites and landmarks, again, these are not just things that are built, like iconic museums, et cetera, but also interesting neighborhoods, looking for places that people want to visit, and what is the cultural vibrancy of the city, neighborhood by neighborhood, not just the iconic sites and things to see and do within it. Convention center, like sports stadiums, is something that we've talked about in terms of infrastructure. And interestingly, now we had always seen there was a correlation between convention centers and visitor expenditure. That doesn't come as any surprise. But now seeing the correlation and relationship between convention centers and business formation. So convention centers attracting meetings, conferences, and events is not just really about filling hotel rooms. It's also a key pillar of economic development strategies now, particularly when you think about the reduction in independent business travel. So conventions, meetings, and conferences have largely recovered and are continuing to grow. So they're an important driver of also, again, creating that vibrancy and how are we filling up and creating activity within our city centers. Convention centers can be a key driver of helping close that gap as we pursue meetings, conferences, and events. They're also key facilities. It's not often well understood that probably in most cities, more than 50% of the events that happen in convention centers are for local residents, not for visitors. So there's a lot of social activity, athletic competitions, et cetera, that happen, shows within the convention center that are actually attracting local residents to come into the city center as well. And lastly, I think one of the other key takeaways is the importance of parks and recreation. That outdoor activities has more moderate correlations with the attraction of visitors than some of the other categories. But as we think about livability, particularly as we look at what we experienced through the pandemic, we were all craving outdoor space. Participation in outdoor activities, outdoor recreation is at record levels. We'll see if that continues over time. But parks and recreation become also an important factor as we think about heat stress and climate change, that many of our cities are becoming hotter. How are we creating outdoor experiences and activities to help people cope with the heat? So those are some of the key just takeaways as it relates to what are some of the important drivers of the livability, lovability, and prosperity that we can take based on the data that we've collected. I'll leave you with sort of 5 kind of key takeaways of our learnings as we've been working on these rankings. This is the 9th edition of the America's Best Cities report. And we have seen shifts and changes, over time. And I think the first and most important kind of takeaway as you look at the data and the rankings goes back to, my discussion at the very beginning, that the forces that attract visitors, talent, and companies are becoming increasingly aligned, and that we can no longer look at economic development, tourism development, and talent attraction as separate initiatives, that really the cities that are prospering the most are doing well in all three of these different areas. I think the second key takeaway is that even while you look at the rankings and you'll see the largest cities are in the top 10, interestingly, they're also the cities that people most want to move to. It doesn't mean everybody's going to move to New York. In fact, the opposite is happening. People are moving to more affordable cities. There's a variety of other consideration factors than people get. And it's very much the same as any consumer product that we would all like to drive, let's say a BMW or some other luxury car, but those aren't the most popular cars that are sold. So I think what that tells us is that there's still incredible opportunity for smaller cities. And that was reflected both in the breadth of the number of cities that people identified. As I said earlier, there were over 70 different cities and towns across America that people identified as the place they would most like to live, visit, or where they think the best job opportunities are. So there are opportunities significantly outside of these top 10 or top 20 cities for smaller towns and cities to prosper. I think it's important for those places that are smaller or not necessarily in the top 10 or the top 20, is that this is not necessarily a problem that can be solved with marketing, that really investing in those place-based assets is key, whether that's cultural assets, whether it's investing in housing, that we really need to think about investing in quality of place in terms of making places more livable and lovable in order to prosper, and that we can't solve this challenge through marketing alone, because most cities' marketing budgets, as you're looking at all of the media that you're competing with, all of the consumer brands that are out there, are relatively insignificant in the grand scheme of things. So marketing is still important. It's still a tool for talent attraction, for visitor attraction, et cetera. But that alone will not change perception or move a city up in the rankings. And if you are a smaller town, or city, important as you think about your positioning, that you can't be everything to everyone. And oftentimes we often see cities that are focused on looking at affordability, or that we have a little bit of everything for everyone. Those are not strong positioning strategies, and that you really need to find a lane that complements or differentiates yourself from other competing towns and cities in your region, but in a complementary way, that you aren't going to be the best at everything. So what are the particular areas within all of the different factors that we're looking at that could be a point of differentiation and comparative advantage for your town or community? And lastly, kind of just leaving as we think about this term, place power, and looking at the influence and strength of city identities, is the relationship now that we're seeing where destination development, as you think about factors and experiences and marketing to attract visitors, yes, that powers the visitor economy, but it's also driving economic development in terms of where businesses are locating now and businesses being formed. And at the same time, the strength of economic development, as we looked at and saw some of the statistics and the relationship between the number of professional service and scientific and technical services companies, the number of patents being formed, the ranking of the university, also showing a relationship with the strength of driving the visitor economy. So I think if I can leave you with one last takeaway and messages, is that as we think about this, we really need to cooperate more closely between destination development, our destination marketing organizations, our economic development organizations, and our city management, city administrations, that the prosperity and future of places is really linked through the efficiency and cooperation of those different entities together to really enhance the the livability, lovability, and prosperity of their communities. If you'd like to learn, we'll jump over to the Q&A here and see if we have some questions here. If you'd like to learn more about Resonance and the work that we do, or reach out to us about how we might be able to help your town or community think about its future, you can go to our website at resonanceco.com, or shoot us an email at info@resonanceco.com as well. So with that, I want to jump over to our Q&A and see if we some of the questions that I see. There's been a lot of chat going on in our various channels here. Great to see so many people from so many different places. So I'll do my best here to take these kind of one by one. So the first question here was what informed the grouping of Resonance's indicators into the 3 pillars that we used this year. And it really was, the groupings of the factors was really through that lens of trying to say, well, which cities are attracting the largest or have the largest prime age populations, and what are the factors associated with that. So our definition of livability is driven by the outcome that we're trying to achieve, which is attracting talent. So those factors that you saw in the livability pillar are really related to the size of prime age population. Lovability, we define those factors based on the outcome we're seeking to achieve, which is visitor expenditure. So looking at what are the factors that have the highest correlation with the size and strength of the visitor economy. And the last pillar around prosperity was driven by looking at the number of businesses being formed. So when you take each of these specific goals or outcomes that we're trying to achieve and do the analysis to look at which factors have the highest correlations with those outcomes. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, they overlap with one another in many different areas. So in that case, we would choose to put a particular factor in the area it had the highest correlation. So let's say something like the number of professional services firms, it is correlated with prime age population, it's correlated with visitor expenditure, but it has the highest correlation with business formation. So that factor was put into that particular area. We did have more factors in the past. I think you're probably referring to the 6 areas that we looked at. But here we've really been trying to simplify it and focus it and be able to align it with the perception data now that Ipsos is also collecting for where people want to live, where they believe the best job opportunities are, and where they want to visit. The next question here is how many people participated in the survey. We had a sample size of over 2,000 people that were a Gen Pop representative sample across the country for both geography and for age and income. It's interesting to be able to, you can slice that a little bit, and you do see some gender differences, some generational differences in terms of where people want to live and visit. So that's a whole other piece of work to look at. When we think about here any specific data about the generational shift informing the report's results, wondering if younger millennials and Gen Zers are disrupting the statistics. So as I just mentioned, the population survey is weighted across generations, so it's reflective of the general adult population, 18 plus. But I do think that we are seeing some of those decisions as it relates to the correlations and the factors with prime age population. So for example, that emergence of broadband internet access speed now showing a relationship with the size of the prime age population from one particular city to the next. These are emerging factors that I think younger generations are driving. I think they're also driving some of the experiential factors and that convergence that we're seeing. And again, this is something that we'll look at over time. We had the factors that we've added this year for walkability and bike score. Those were factors that were not in the report in 2019. And I see those as factors being very specifically driven by factors that have emerged as important to Gen Z and millennials that maybe weren't as important to Gen X or baby boomers in the past. Another question here about when we built this list, was the focus on cities? Were there suburbs, sleeper towns, or smaller areas that went up on the ranks? So, our focus is on, mid to large size cities. So we're collecting, looking at metropolitan areas of 500,000 plus across the country. We have done analysis of smaller cities in the past, and specifically smaller city and some of the trends. I think, overall, some of the observational trends that we've seen have been obviously our city centers. Had flights to downtown, the growth of people wanting to live in downtown and city centers lead, from 2000 to 2017. But then as the millennial population has aged, we started to see a little bit of a movement away from city centers. And then, of course, when the pandemic happened, that really did cause a flight to space, more suburban, exurban locations. And I think we have seen some smaller cities across the country that are moving up in the rankings, like Lansing in Michigan, for example, is a city that's been moving up in the rankings. And yet other cities, even like Charleston, South Carolina, that is in the top 30 now in the rankings. So that really is to my point that I think smaller cities and communities that offer great quality of place and the mix of assets that we're talking about are prospering, are growing, and have a lot of opportunity in front of them. At the same time, they have to be able to manage the affordability challenges. For example, we've worked with Greenville, South Carolina on their economic development strategy, and they've been wildly successful in creating a great downtown, a destination that a lot of people want to live in. But they didn't plan for the housing and the transit that is required to maintain that population, to serve and ensure the destination economy continues to thrive. So that's a real impediment now because housing has become quite expensive, and a lot of the workforce can't afford to live within the city, and the transit doesn't exist to get from the outlying regions into the city. So these are now challenges of some of the symptoms of success. Kamala has a question about how perception intersects with reality, just thinking how recent report by Demographia listed cities by housing affordability specifically, which included a lot of major US cities at the lower end due to high cost of living. And I think this is a great point. So, further to my point, if I thought about if you made a list of the cars you would like to own, for example, or the brand of bike you aspire to have, but the one that you actually have in your garage or in your bike rack is probably not the same. So when we think about the strength of the rankings and where people are telling us, I think that reflects the strength of the brand of those places. But it's not necessarily where we're seeing people moving to. And they are moving to places that are not in the top 10 list. They're moving to Tampa, they're moving to Austin, they're moving to Dallas, Houston, Raleigh, et cetera. Places that are maybe not in the top for some of the key place-based assets that we're measuring, but maybe they have more affordability of space or they have job opportunities. So we can still see that clearly people are moving to where job opportunities and housing is affordable. As I mentioned earlier, though, that affordability advantage is disappearing. And it's going to be the net challenge for a lot of these places that have seen that inflow. And Austin would be an example of that, one of the places that has seen the greatest population growth over the last 5 years, but now is challenged from an infrastructure perspective. And you're starting to see housing prices have dropped 10 to 15%. You're seeing some companies choosing to leave the region, et cetera. So that's why it's really important as we think about, you can't just excel at lovability. You have to balance that with livability in order to ensure that long-term prosperity. Doug has a question here about downtown cores facing continued challenges. How will a city's management of its core affect public perception and impact visitation and business growth? I think this is a great question. It's one of the critical issues facing many cities moving forward. And that is why if we're not going back to the office in the United States Monday to Friday, most countries in the world have. So this is really a US, Canada, UK, Australia phenomenon, and the result of which that these are the countries that have the largest homes on average. So we have the space to be able to live this hybrid lifestyle that we're creating, but it does create significant issues for the downtowns, particularly in cities that had very monopurpose downtowns, largely centered around Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 office activities. So converting some of that to residential is part of the answer, but we're actually thinking about and prioritizing really the visitor economy in terms of whether that's through sports, whether it's through investment in cultural assets, of how do we change the central business district into central social districts, as some have called them, that these are now places for meetings, conferences, events, gatherings, that we'll need to look at changing the way we use our city centers if that office activity and vibrancy is not going to return. There's a comment here about they considering Dallas a first-tier city and Austin is second-tier. So why would Dallas be under Austin? And that would certainly be true in terms of just if we looked at the GDP of a city. And I think that's really what the rankings are revealing, is that even in our survey with Ipsos, that more people want to visit Austin than want to visit Dallas, or more people aspire to live in Austin or live in Dallas. But Dallas, they see, has more job opportunities. So it really is the weighting of the balance of these different factors. So it's not to say that Dallas is not a top tier city, but in the perception of its brand is not as strong amongst consumers as Austin, and that's influencing its place in the ranking. There's some other comments on there. So of course, these rankings always spark debate between people, because many of us love the places that we're in. So it's great to see some of that conversation going on there. Another question here from Lauren. So it's a great presentation. Thanks. In addition to the free ranking report, will today's presentation be made to be available for download? The presentation won't be available to download, but the recording of this webinar will be available. So you can go back and reference it and screenshot what you like. If there's a specific piece of data you're looking for, please reach out to me. We're happy to share particular reports and insights. Here's a comment from Marina. Assessing cultural component. You use TripAdvisor scores and recommendations to me. TripAdvisor is more for tourists. So scores and recommendations there say more about tourist traffic, and local people use it much less than visitors. And that's true. So we are not looking at TripAdvisor in terms of rating the quality. We're really just using it as an aggregator of how many restaurants are there. And all it takes is for really the establishment to register itself. So this for us is just essentially looking at a way of aggregating the number of restaurants, the number of parks, outdoor activities, et cetera. So we're not factoring in how many ratings it has or how many reviews it has, which is affected by the number of visitors, and what its quality is. We're just counting and using it as a platform because it is the most widely visited site for travel and tourism. But great point there. Yes, we agree completely that locals are much more likely to use Google or other channels as they think about that. Comment here, questions. So many questions coming in. Great to see, and we only have a couple more minutes here. From Will, can you speak whether there was a conversation or decision making around how livability and lovability and prosperity seem to be much more objective and robust data categories as opposed to lovability, which has several more questionably applicable categories and relies massively on the single source of TripAdvisor? Feels like lovability is a very different character than the other two data sets. And that's a fair comment, fair point. It is quite different. And that is what's made the rankings that we've done unique and different. And the reason why those are included in here, it's not because we think TripAdvisor is the best source or et cetera. It's because in our analysis of looking at 1,000 different statistics and factors, we've continually found that they have some of the highest correlations with the outcomes we're seeking. For example, the number of nightlife experiences listed in TripAdvisor has one of the highest correlations with the number of startups created in a city every year. And so this is not a logical equation. Is it the startup scene that's creating demand for nightlife, or are startups locating in cities that are more vibrant and therefore have more nightlife experiences? We're only identifying the correlation. We can't say there's causation, but that is the exact point of our rankings, is to identify what might seem as unusual or not related factors that are driving the outcomes we're seeking to achieve. So nightlife and the nighttime economy is not just about visitor expenditure, it's about economic development. So that's why you see a lot of these non-traditional factors that reflect the experiential quality of the city coming from non-traditional data sources. It's not because we have a particular preference for them, it's because we've statistically demonstrated that these factors have some of the highest correlations with not only attracting visitor expenditure, but business formation as well. Don't think we're going to be able to get to all of the questions here. There's a question here talked a lot about smaller city opportunities, but for larger cities, what would you say is the biggest focus to stay on the forefront? Housing. Yeah, I think housing is the biggest challenge as it relates to larger cities, but also what are the things that go with housing? I don't think just converting a lot of office buildings into housing in and of itself is going to create the demand or solve our city center problems. That is one part of the solution or one part of the problem, but we have to create the quality of life in terms of the experiences that would cause somebody to want to live in the city center. If people historically wanted to live in city centers so they didn't have to commute, but if I don't have to go into the office as much or as often, then there needs to be a different reason, a different driver to support the demand for that housing that we're creating. So this is a complex problem that really is about creating and thinking about the experiential quality of our cities and downtowns, not just converting a bunch of offices into housing. Last question here, I'll try and hit one more is, where have you seen success in bringing leadership along the journey, looking at these components, tourism, economic development, workforce, separately as opposed to together? Do you get a sense there's a hesitation to actually invest in place? This is an essential challenge and problem. Some cities and communities are quite siloed and their organizations are quite divided. We've been working with the Brussels region and in Europe, and I think they've done a great job of bringing more than 70 different organizations together. So also not just thinking about the destination marketing organization, the economic development organization, and government administration together, but the private sector. And I think that's probably often lost and we've underappreciated the participation and support of the private sector and other public institutions like universities. We were just doing some work and presented a report in Edmonton in Canada last week, which was a regional evaluation and looking at universities, hospitals. There are a lot of different stakeholders and organizations that play a role beyond. But the important part is that they were putting all of these stakeholders at the table together and using the data and the insights that we were created to galvanize their conversations and figure out what should we really be prioritizing in terms of capitalizing on our strengths and what are the weaknesses that we need to focus on improving. So I'm sorry I didn't get to all of your questions. I know we had an hour here today. Really appreciate everybody joining us today and being able to participate in this discussion. Again, the recording will be made available. We'll be pushing that out to everyone. And please visit the worldsbestcities.com website. You can find our report for European cities. We'll be releasing a new Asia Pacific report in the fall. And our World's Best Cities report will be launched from London in November. And if you'd like to learn more about how Resonance can help your town, city, destination in terms of thinking about its future, we'd love to chat. You can reach out to us anytime at info@resonanceco.com. So thanks so much, everyone. And we'll hopefully look forward to seeing some of you out there in real life at some of the different conferences that we'll be speaking at, whether that's Destinations International in Tampa in July or the International Economic Development Council in Denver in September or other places in between. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks for joining us.